Welcome back to the monthly edition of the PigX podcast. I'm your host, Delaney Howell. We're excited to kick off another season of this podcast. Throughout the season, we'll be bringing you conversations and ideas from across the swine industry that help producers and those working in the swine industry raise healthy pigs and build successful operations. Today, we're sharing two conversations from across the swine industry, from raising pigs in Brazil compared to the United States to managing risk at every stage of production. First, we hear from Dr. Caroline de Lara, Executive Manager for Live Pig Production at a JBS company in Brazil, alongside Dr. Matthew Turner, Head of Operations for JBS Live Pork. Together, they discuss how labor, climate, and ventilation challenges differ between Brazil and the United States, while also highlighting the common goal of raising healthy pigs and what producers in both countries can learn from one another. Later in the episode, we visit with Brady Reicks of Reicks View Farms as he reflects on 15 years of trading agricultural commodities and how those experiences impacted his perspective on risk management back on the family farm. Brady shares why protecting margin looks different for every operation, along with practical ways producers can approach marketing and business decisions with confidence rather than intimidation. Let's start by hearing how Dr. Ann and Dr. Matthew first got involved in swine production.
This is Matthew Turner. My history, I'm a swine veterinarian by training. So a graduate of North Carolina State University College of Veterinary Medicine, graduated in 2000. Soon after graduation, took a job with Livestock Veterinary Services for about a year and a half as a swine consultant, then moved on to Prestige Farms, where I did veterinary practice for about 15 years and was able to join JBS as head of operations about 9 years ago. But I was raised on a small fair-to-finish hog operation in eastern North Carolina.
Wonderful.
So my name is Lara. I'm a veterinarian. I graduated in Brazil in 2005. And after that, I started to work in agriculture, pig production mainly. And since then, I studied my master's degree finished in 2011, and then my PhD, which part of that I spent here in the University of Minnesota as a short-term scholar. So I've been working in Seara since 2013 when JBS acquired Seara in Brazil.
Great. Thanks for sharing that background. So your presentation today really looked at contrasting and comparing production in the United States versus production in Brazil, which I thought was super fascinating just to think through all of the different pieces of that. But let's start with production system comparison first. What were some of those similarities and differences that you both touched on?
Yeah, I think, as you look at the similarities, and there's a lot more similarities than there are differences, honestly. And if you look around the world, pig production is similar everywhere you go. Brazil is a very advanced swine production country, and the U.S. is very advanced, so there are a lot of similarities. So very modern ventilation styles, facility designs as the industries have modernized over the last 20 or 30 years. So very similar from that standpoint. Some big differences, I think, and Laura, if you want to mention about labor, I think that's probably the biggest difference between the two countries and disease.
Yes. So I think labor, as we mentioned, is something that is different because we have more labor when we compare to the system Brazil versus United States. But also, I would like to add a comment because Dr. Turner, in our presentation, he mentioned about two values. And I think this is very important when we talk about pig production. So if we have the discipline and keep the consistency of our actions and our management, then we could simplify some of those things. So I think this is very important when we talk about these managements and these basic procedures. But yes, labor can be an issue to be consistent with that. So I think is one of bigger difference.
Yeah, so just a comment, Brazilian operations on sow farms, for example, they have close to double the amount of labor that we would have on a farm in the United States, but that's a constraint for the U.S. It's a benefit for Brazil, but it's not to say that the same processes that are taking place in Brazil can't be done in the U.S. It's not an excuse. It's just a reality of the current environment. The other big difference, I think, between the two countries is we do have a couple of production limiting diseases that are very endemic in our population. So PEDV virus and PRRS virus are for sure impactful, and they do cause us some troubles that Brazil has the fortune of not having. However, in years past, Brazil has had export limiting diseases, such as classical swine fever, foot and mouth disease in that country. So a lot of similarities on the farm side, differences in labor and diseases.
So you're starting to allude to the reality of the labor situation. Why is it that pig production in Brazil tends to require more labor compared to the United States?
So the hourly wage for an individual is higher in the U.S. than it would be in Brazil.
Do you see any correlations between herd health in one or the other being better or worse due to labor?
I don't think I would relate herd health to labor necessarily. I would not.
What about vaccine programs? That was the other thing that was a little bit different between Brazil and the United States.
Yeah, so a lot of similarities. Circovirus, Mycoplasma, Lawsonia would be the three major pathogens that essentially all pigs are vaccinated against. But there are some APP vaccines that Anna Lara uses pretty frequently, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so it depending flow by flow, farm by farm, if we have a diagnostic and with an impactful for APP, for example, then we adopt and we proceed with the autogenous vaccine. And besides those pathogens, we do immunocastrate in our system. So also it's different from United States. It's not related to the pathogens, but it's a procedure that it's pretty different from United States.
So as we move into the next phase of production, we talked about sows. Then you talked about pre-wean livability and some of the comparisons there. Walk us through a few of those, like colostrum intake and some of the birthing procedures.
Yeah, so the main goal is to improve pig quality. And with that, how can we achieve that? On colostrum intake and farrowing assistance. So these are some negotiable procedures that we are adopting in order to improve this pig quality. So once we have this better quality, we know that we can capture those efforts in this in the following phases as nursery and finishing farms.
Yeah, and just to echo some of that, I had the opportunity to go to Brazil and actually visit quite a few farms there and look at the procedures that they were doing. The U.S. was struggling quite a bit around pigs weaned per sow per year. I went down to Brazil, spent about 2 weeks studying the processes and procedures they had in place, and we brought those technologies back to the U.S. and we tried to implement as many as we could. And the one that really stuck was ensuring that pig got warmed up and on a teat as soon as possible after birth. That is absolutely the most critical time in the pig's life. And if you can set that pig up right to start with, you're a lot better off. We are limited on the number of people that we have because labor is so much more expensive in the U.S., but still that critical time point is something we did bring home from Brazil.
And I did appreciate the video of the day one care where they are cleaning off the piglets, warming them up, and helping them get on teat, which I assume really impacts livability as well for those piglets. So moving into recently weaned pigs, let's talk about some of the management practices there that are similar and different.
Yeah, so I'll start off. One of the big things that we both do is we're trying to segregate those bottom end pigs. And when I say the bottom end pigs, it's the 10 to 15% of pigs that are more at risk than the rest of the population, and focusing on those pigs, doing everything you can to get them started on feed immediately post-weaning. And that was gruel feeding and mat feeding is what we do here in the U.S. And, when I was in Brazil, I was really impressed with the focus that the producer partners there, we would call them contract producers in the U.S., but those producer partners were so dialed in on starting pigs. And they were focusing on pigs that were small to them, but they looked like our average pig or top-end pig. So really strong procedures stimulating that pig, just feeding them 4, 5, 6 times a day to stimulate them to eat.
So again, the discipline to keep that procedure. We know that the best producers, they perform they apply this procedure of gruel feed at least 6 times per day. So some producers apply more than that. So for only the first week, we believe that it's a good investment, and then we will capture the the results in the.
And share with us too, Anne, you were mentioning something about with gruel feeding, it needs to happen. The pigs need to eat it within a certain time frame, or that might be an indicator that something is wrong.
Yes, exactly. So the amount of feed that is provided should be consumed in 15 minutes at max. So if it's not, something is wrong, and then you need to replace it and try to understand what is going on.
How did you figure out it was a 15-minute window?
We tested some of that, and the amount of feed, it's calculated by the number of pigs that we have at the barn.
Okay, great. Thank you for adding that in. I was curious.
Just one addition to that, one thing that I recognized and we discussed while we were in Brazil was you think about how the pig eats prior to weaning. You know, the sow calls the pig. They all come over in the litter and they nurse all at the same time because the sow lets her milk down all at one time. And that pattern of eating behavior is imprinted on the pig. So when they're immediately after weaning, they're wanting a stimulation. They're expecting that sow to call them and say, "Hey, it's time to eat. Everybody jump up and go eat." And you think about what we ask a pig to do today. You put them on a truck. They may be on a truck for 12 hours, and then they get delivered to a farm, and they're running around. They're looking for mom, and we throw dry feed in a feeder and say, "Best of luck." And it just doesn't work. In these gruel troughs, for example, when you have enough space at that gruel trough that every pig can eat together, it's very, very impactful because that's what the pig needs, is that stimulation and everybody to eat at one time.
That's such a great way to put it. I've not heard it phrased that way, but it makes sense. Okay, so then we get into the finishing pig phase. You talked a little bit about average farm, barn size, space per pig. Walk us through some of those differences and similarities.
Yeah. A couple of things. So one is the number of people that are taking care of the pigs. Obviously, Brazil has that advantage, so they have more people per pigs, or more pigs per people. The other big difference was the fact that in Brazil, they're required to have roughly 1 meter square per finisher pig. And in the U.S., our standard is something around 7.5 square feet. So they're at about 10 square feet, which is 1 meter, and we're at 7.5 square feet. So a really big difference in square footage. And we all know that the amount of space a pig gets is very dramatically impactful on gain in particular. And it also allows, less pathogen concentration in the barn, less stress on the animal. So we think about things about optimizing our facility, putting as many pigs through a facility as we can. That's not really the model that Brazil uses. It's more about optimizing the performance of the pig. And I think that's a challenge back to us of how we think about optimizing our performance. We need to think about performance probably more than we need to think about optimizing our fixed cost, which is a facility cost.
And I think to add 2 more topics on that, the facilities. So 80% of our system, finishing farms, we work with a natural ventilation. So this is different from United States also because the weather in Brazil, so we can't run in this kind of facility with a good air quality and temperature. And a second topic is about the drinkers. So besides the drinker in the feeder, we also provide extra drinker at the barn. So we run some trials, and this is the best performance and also the best cost. So we keep on that management.
And the weather that Anna Lara mentioned, it is a difference for sure. The extremes heat and the extreme cold is not something they have to deal with in Brazil as much as we do in the U.S. So we were actually out this morning, and it was pretty cold. It's about 40 degrees this morning. Anna Lara was freezing to death, and I was like, "No, this is great. What are you talking about?" It is very different. It's like spring and fall all the time in Brazil, which is when we see our best performance, spring and fall in the U.S. So that is an advantage, but at the same time, we have a lot of mechanical ventilated barns in the U.S., and she has to deal with a lot of natural ventilated barns, which has its own complexity.
It was great too. I appreciated that you walked through all of these comparisons and then you ended with looking at some data. How does this impact the pig per mated sow per year, the nursery mortality, a couple other factors? Share with us how and why you picked those factors to compare.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the truest measure of efficiency from a standpoint of hog production, you have to look at pigs marketed per sow per year, because that is a totally encompassing number in terms of productivity. Now, we're not touching information like feed conversion, average daily gain. We're just looking at total number of pigs that you can produce from a sow farm. And there's no doubt the Brazilian production is beating the U.S. production very, very handily. And I think we need to look to the best to learn from the best and take as much information as we can and try to apply it here to bring our systems up to par.
Is there anything else that either of you want to add that I missed from your presentation?
The only thing I would add is I really appreciated all the presentations today, and I really think the funding for this pig livability project is something that we need to continue to work on. And it's a huge opportunity for the U.S., and we just need to keep investing the dollars and the resources towards improving pig livability in the U.S., because if we don't, we're going to continue to fall behind other countries.
That was a lot of great information, and we truly appreciate both perspectives on raising pigs in the United States and Brazil shared here on the PigX podcast. Now let's turn our conversation to Brady Reicks to learn more about his background in swine production and his perspective on risk management.
I went to Iowa State here, where I'm speaking today. Happy to be here. I got a business degree. I did not get an agriculture degree. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. I think the key for me in my career was I was an intern with the National Pork Producers Council in Washington, D.C., and it was a foreign trade internship. So I just learned a lot about how dependent, my dad was a producer, grew up on a farm. I didn't understand how much of our pork went overseas. Then I didn't understand how much it impacted the price, and that kind of fascinated me. Went back to school, got my degree, worked at in a different industry for a while, and then was lucky to meet an individual, Joe Kearns, who at the time was working for Iowa Select, kind of a similar role that I do for my own family now. And he was starting his own business and kind of looking for a young person to help out. And I was the perfect candidate because I wanted to learn more about it. And so his business grew. The timing was really good because corn prices became very volatile when he started his business, and so his services were needed. It grew very fast. And so I was able to learn a ton just following him around and meeting other families like the family I grew up in. But more than anything, it gave me a skill, right? So a skill that was different than what existed at home with my dad or people that already worked there. And so that led to me going about late 2014, moved home. And so naturally what I started to do in our business was do the same things I did there. Buy corn, sell pigs, use futures and options. I learned a lot about nutrition when I was working for Joe. It was one of the things that he had an expertise in somewhat. So, and then over time, my responsibilities increased, my ownership's increased, and kind of on the path to manage day to day in the future. So, yeah, I started kind of in industry, but not as a producer. So, very grateful for that.
So just give us a little more context. Were you a Series 3 broker when you were working for Joe?
Yes, I was a Series 3 broker. I got my Series 3. I did fail once, but I did pass. And so yeah, I was a licensed broker, so I could take, I took orders and did that kind of a thing and kind of the dirty work. But then Joe's practice, and it's similar today. It's it's been turned into something different over time. Was very much a consulting, not just a broker, not just someone you call up and say, hey, I have an order for 10 contracts. It was kind of partnership. That's how we always tried to sell it, right? So in your partners, you're in their hip pocket, right? Alongside with them through the battles. So I was a broker. I did get trained formally. I don't know how you'd say that.
Licensed.
Formally trained.
Yeah.
I was a formally trained broker. I had to study, and I had to go do the ethics stuff, and it was around Dodd-Frank. So so I did all that stuff. But I think as time went on, I morphed into more of a consultant than a broker.
Yeah, because you had that producer background. So you really understood what folks were going through. You understood the margins. You understood how to hedge the risk that was associated with the feed and nutrition side of it. So you brought that really unique perspective, I think it sounds like, to the producers you were working with. And then when you transitioned then back to Reicks View Farm, tell me a little bit about how that unique experience working on the commodity side then helped you as you transitioned back into the production side.
I think it made me very confident that I could navigate that as a producer just because I had been on the other side. And then not just in risk management, but other, and Joe, at Kearns and Associates at the time, there was all different kinds of industry people wondering, basically you're an influencer. How can we help you influence our process? So I got to meet a lot of different, and because I was still associated with my dad's business, I got to meet a lot of different salespeople and industry people and all across the industry. So that helped me understand what they do and what's important to them. So I think it allowed me to deal better with people, suppliers, vendors, just because of that interaction. But from the pure day-to-day stuff, I kind of almost got like a master's degree is what I always tell people.
Kind of on the ground experience.
Right. So I could hit the ground running
and
bring something back to the business right away and then learn all the other stuff maybe I needed to learn at the same time. So that wasn't really the plan, but it's just kind of what happened.
Yeah, and this is a really unique topic. Usually on the PigX podcast, we're talking a lot about research, nutrition, disease. So this is unique and different from what we usually cover. So excited to dig more into risk management today.
Yes.
And risk management is a topic and a term, I think, that means a lot of different things to different people. And you shared a really unique perspective at the Iowa Swine Day about what that term really kind of meant to you and how people might define that differently from person to person and operation to operation. So maybe give us your perspective of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think honestly, but I've gotten exposed to insurance. There's risk management folks, and that's basically how they, decide who they're going to insure and not insure. I think I've found over time as a business owner, it's really about avoiding disaster, I think is what normally what you think about. However, I think that what gets lost in that is you kind of become defensive when you think too much that way and you're too process oriented and you're thinking about how do I and you're maybe missing opportunities. So I guess what I tried to say today is I think it's really about understanding what your end goal is and then how do you manage the risk to get to your end goal. Then you don't get distracted by the 15 or 20 different risks, and you think more about, okay, that's where I want to get. And in margin management, it's okay, this is how much money, what is acceptable of a margin for my business, and you can use the tool. So that's what I'm doing, but I've learned over time as being more of a business owner and making decisions outside of just financial decisions, but manage that it's the same thing. So I guess trying to simplify it a little bit, not make it this scary financial thing with all these fancy words and terms. It's kind of the same thing as what any business owner does.
As we think about the hog industry, it is so consolidated, and some producers really may not have the opportunity to manage a lot of their risks because they are contracted. So how does risk management fit into the space as it sits today?
That's a really good question. I think I'm going to argue that no matter where you are in the chain, whether you're buying weaned pigs or you're selling weaned pigs or you're a contract grower, I think there is risk management opportunities for you. It depends, but I think that's true, and I think that, and maybe a little bit where you're going with it, I think to have the time and energy to evaluate it that way is that's one of the things I've been lucky to do, where our organization was the size that I could do that, right? And I can spend a lot of time that others can't, but I guess to directly answer your question, I think that any level producer, anybody who owns pigs in any way, there's or owns buildings, there's ways to manage your risk. I challenge people to think about how can I get to where I want. What are the tools to help me get where I want to get, and be creative and thoughtful about that.
So let's talk about some of the time and tools needed to manage risk, because there's only so much time in the day. And there are probably some tools you might use that producers or those folks listening could pick up and start utilizing. How much time do you spend dedicated to watching the markets, measuring and managing risk?
I used to think about it as being 50% of my time, and I still try to think about it that way. My role's changed. And so I've tried to find ways to supplement that when my time gets pulled in a different direction. So I think obviously depends on the situation, but a company our size, we should be spending a decent amount of time. I think you should spend a little bit of time every day. What I said in the Q&A portion of the talk was, I think you want to have an opinion. You want to force yourself to what do I think the market's going to do, or where do I think it's going to go? I think if that's your rule, that will force you to take the time to talk to people or read something or ask questions or filter through all this noise. So that's kind of my answer is you got to have an opinion. You got to, and whatever risk you're managing, be aware of what's happening and where you think it's going.
So still high level here, there are a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise in the markets. There's a lot of fundamentals, technical factors to watch. What are some of the tools or resources or sites that you're using to keep tabs on everything?
I think, honestly, some of the best information for me is just looking what our production is doing and listening to the people that we work with every day as producers, veterinarians, nutritionists. They give you little cues of what's happening and what you see. I think, to be honest, I think the advent of YouTube is a great thing. So you can watch videos instead of reading through these long articles that might not make sense. I think video, there's market influencers that are innovating that way. I would recommend YouTube clips to be more efficient. And then, you have your advisor, right, for somebody like us, and we still work primarily through Everag, and, having a person you can call and they be the filter is probably the best case scenario. It's different for everybody, different for your relationship. But I think in my role, that's what I've started to try to figure out to do, kind of back to the people thing. Somebody who knows how I think, who knows what my goals are, and they can filter all that information because, like you said, I did it. That's kind of what my earlier career was. You can spend all day talking to people, reading things. And so when you don't have that time, how do you filter it? Hopefully I answered the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so as you kind of think mid-year here in 2025, what are some of those big macro level themes that you're watching right now?
Great question. First of all, clearly tariffs, exports. I think a lot of people in the industry have always, this administration's a pro-agriculture administration. So I think we feel some level of confidence that this administration will try to give us every break they can in terms of continuing to export, because obviously our industry is heavily dependent on exports. But that is something to watch. That's something that can change quickly because we aren't the only industry in the country, and there's not very many of us. So that can change quickly. I think keeping an eye on that is really important. I think that just the overall inflation, economic health, I think, to be honest, that in pork, I think sometimes that helps us. When pocketbooks are tight, people, I think fresh pork does good at retail, doesn't do great in restaurants. And when people go to retail, I think they eat more pork. So I think it's actually one of those things. It might help us if pork demand, if our U.S. economy isn't as good. And then, I just think overall, meat, right? The talk ended today about the future of meat eaters. And what our product is poised to have less consumption. So I'm paying attention to see right now pork's really cheap relative to beef. Can we fill that gap? Can we pick up some people that don't normally eat pork because of the price? We want it to be because of taste and flavor. I learned that today, but I think there is an opportunity there. It feels like it's been there before. We struggle to take advantage of it, but that would be a game changer for me if we feel like, okay, we've really shifted pork demand because it's where it sits relative to beef.
And it sounds like your supply and demand outlook is fairly positive as well.
Yes, I think that we're in a place where there's no real clear sign of expansion, and there's still enough disease pressure that it's going to be tough to really you're going to show up one day and there's way more pigs than you thought there was, right? So that's helpful. And I think just what I just outlined, I think pork's it's not, the world has adjusted to inflation, right? And so I think that meat will move, pork will move, exports, maybe you're a governor or they're the cherry on the top, maybe, so to speak. And then I think on the input side, I think it's if there's problems this weather season here in the States, I think you could see corn jump a little bit, but relative to where hog prices are, I think the margin outlook's favorable. I think it continue to be favorable. But back to the theme of my presentation, you don't know. So how do you move forward with it?
Well, I think maybe that's a good place to kind of continue landing the plane, if you will, to talk more about margin management. We're watching the markets, we're paying attention, as you mentioned, we're having an opinion, but how does that translate into margin management?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the piece, I didn't go too much in the presentation, is knowing what your cost is. That can change as your as inputs change, as your mortality changes. So I think, first of all, it's the most important thing, knowing your cost. Try to monitor it as best as you can and project it as best as you can. And then, what is your goal, right? I think it's very simple, kind of boring, but what do you want out of the year? Somebody asked me how to benchmark. I think if you have a plan, a financial projection, so to speak, and the markets are in a place and you have the right tools to lock that in, that you should do that to an extent. So to me, margin management is, there's always opportunities. Every day there's an opportunity. What's your plan? It's good to have change for plan because things change. Maybe there could be a new tariff tomorrow, right? So the plan can change, but it's good to have a plan, good to have a goal, know what success is. That's margin management to me.
It's really back to the basics sometimes in managing your margin.
I totally agree. It's a type of, it's the nature of it can really be overcomplicated, right? Because it's fast moving. There's a lot of factors. It's really, there's a lot of topics to cover. So I think it's really easy to get, there's a lot of noise. And it's back to the basics, I think, is the tried and true. You're going to be around for a while.
And that noise, I think, kind of clouds judgment to really tie into that last question, the what if question. What if prices go to $115, $130, and producers are usually on the side of the what if markets go higher. And I think a lot of times leave the high side open, but don't always think about protecting from the low side. So how do you manage that side of it, forecast it, and just sometimes move forward if maybe you called it wrong?
Yes, I think that's very, very, very well said. So now would be it's possible that the market goes higher than it is today, and those historical margins that are already very historically high could be higher, and you could miss it. But I think that's where you can kind of drive yourself nuts, trying to have a crystal ball. It's just not realistic. So I think that's part of my message. What's your goal? Were you successful with your goal? Now it's okay, just like any other endeavor, and go back. Well, maybe I could have done a little bit better, right? Maybe there's something I missed there, and next time I see that, I can maybe approach that a little bit different. That's part of what I was trying to talk about with flexibility as well, right? There's ways you can build it so you have a floor or a ceiling, and then there's also upside potential or downside. So you don't have to just pick a price. You can have ranges, and therefore it's like, oh, it's easier to pull the trigger. I might not miss out. I might not hit the top, but at least I'm not going to miss out on some opportunity. So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Brady, any parting thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Honored to be on the podcast, and thanks for what you do.
In today's episode, we heard global perspectives on swine production, including the similarities and differences in raising pigs in Brazil and the United States. We also heard about how factors like labor, climate, and ventilation impact day-to-day management. Then we discussed approaches to risk management at every stage of production and what it takes to make confident marketing and business decisions back on the farm. A big thank you to Dr. Caroline de Lara and Dr. Matthew Turner for sharing their experiences and insights on international pork production, and to Brady Reicks for reflecting on his background in commodity trading and how it informs his approach to risk management today. And thank you to all of you for tuning in to the PigX podcast. We'll be back next month with another timely conversation. Until then, I'm Delaney Howell, and this has been the PigX Podcast.
PigX is a national podcast hosted by the Pig Livability Project partners at Iowa State University, Kansas State University, and Purdue, and supported by the Iowa Pork Industry Center. For more information on the project, head to www.piglivability.org, or to inquire directly with questions regarding the project, email ipic.iastate.edu. PigX, ideas in the swine industry worth sharing.